Good afternoon. How are you? I'm so happy to have you here for the Loose Parts Summit, the first time ever that we're doing this. So it's exciting to have you join us. And just a little bit of background on how I met Jennifer and Wendy. On one of my trips in December, when I was supposed to be presenting in New York City, somehow with the storms, my suitcases with all my loose parts left me. And I was without any materials for my presentation. So I reached out to this wonderful place called Beyond the Square Materials Center. And they came in on an, I think it was a weekend, or you weren't open that day, and you came in and you rescued me. And I'm thankful for that, but also the fact that it's such a wonderful place. I mean, I walked in there and I thought I was in the middle of an art gallery and all the wonderful things that you have. So without much to say, I'm going to let you do a little bit more as we go along and introduce and share with the audience what else you want to share about who you are and what you do. But let me start by asking you, what is your definition of loose parts?
Thank you so much, Miriam. We're thrilled to be here. And my name is Jennifer Carvajal, and I'm the Senior Educational Director at Teaching Beyond the Square. And when we think about loose parts, we really are trying to expand our definition of what that means. I think when a lot of people think of loose parts, they think of tiny little items in small boxes presented to children. And we try to think a little bit more broadly about them. So what are the materials and things that we can find in our environments that we can use in our classrooms, in our homes? And a big piece of that is, just thinking about what we already have access to. And I think when we can expand that concept of what loose parts means, it also can expand the possibilities in your classroom. And it doesn't have to be a scary thing for twos and Todd's teachers when they're thinking about choking hazards, because again, we're thinking bigger. We're thinking about detergent caps and oatmeal containers and those boxes that end up on your porch. We're thinking about fabric that's transparent, all sorts of different materials that are not necessarily tiny. It's just this idea of thinking about found materials that we already have in our environment and how can we bring them to inspire the children in our classrooms and in our homes. So you'll hear us interchangeably use found materials and loose parts because we kind of think of them as one and the same.
Thank you. And can you share a little bit more about what is Beyond the Square Material Center and the trailers that you have? And how do you go about curating those materials?
Sure. My name is Wendy Gelsenleiter, and I currently am the materials educator and the coordinator of Teaching Beyond the Square's Materials Center. And before, I want to give you a little bit of background because a lot of people ask us, how do you start a materials center? And I think it is interesting to learn about us in terms of our history. The Materials Center is located on the top floor of a brownstone in New York City, and underneath it is Beginnings Nursery, committed to supporting quality and innovative early childhood education. Back in 2007, so it's been a long time, and Sheila Wolper was the director of Beginnings Nursery School, and at that time I was the assistant director, and we sent the staff out during orientation to do a recycling materials search in celebration of us opening up this center. And the objective of this search was twofold. First, we wanted to make sure that we had enough materials and that we had a variety of materials in our center. And second, we wanted to spread the word throughout Lower Manhattan of our initiative. And the initiative was that we were going to begin using materials in a new way. And we were hopeful that we would begin to form relationships with communities, businesses in our community. And the reason that we started this center in the first place is because every year in the summer, Sheila would send us in cars to Ronkonkoma in Long Island to another material center, because there were none in Manhattan at the time where we could go and load up our cars with materials, wood, fabric, cardboard, all of these open-ended materials where children could bring their own ideas to the materials and load up the cars and bring them back to the nursery school so we could fill our classrooms with it. As well as at that time, there were some teachers that had gone to Reggio Emilia and were influenced by their philosophy, and also were influenced by the Remedia Center there. And so we had this dream of, why can't we have our own material center in our school? So that whole idea started in 2007. Fast forward to 2013, Jane Rakusin was the director, and she still is, and she's still working very hard. And she formed Teaching Beyond the Square, which is a nonprofit organization, and it was formed to fill a void that existed about the importance of early childhood education in our world today. And it still is, and she's still working really hard. And the Material Center is a large part of Teaching Beyond the Square. And from 2013 until today, we have contributed over 3,000 pounds to schools and to the public. And since 2013 and 2007, we have been continuously redefining, readjusting, reorganizing along the way. And we were hopeful in 2007 and to form relationships with businesses, and we've gone far beyond that. By word of mouth, by meeting people in the Material Center like you. This is why we're talking with you right now. Family, friends, and to us, building community and relationships is vital to our existence. So let's take a look at our plastic section, because Miriam, that's what you found that's what you were drawn to when you first walked in to the Material Center. So when we look at the photo of the Material Center in 2007, you can see that it's not very large, and we had a lot of space around it. That's because we didn't have as many materials. The photos after that are what you see today. It's very spread out. And then there's a photo of black and white plastics, and you can see how very highly organized it is. And that is very intentional. And we often hear people walking around or leaving the Material Center saying, I'm never going to throw anything away anymore. And that is one of our missions. We don't want to just supply people with a big supply of materials. We want to set up the Material Center to inspire people to start collecting, and to take a look at the environment that they're already in, see what they have, and start collecting. Or when they are about to throw something away, look at it and think, if I had, I'm going to lift up my hands. If I had, 10 of these, what could I do with them? Or would that be valuable? Because we always say when you have more than one, it becomes valuable. If you have 10 of these, it becomes valuable, and you can do something with them. And we set up the center to inspire. We set up the center so that when you walk in, you say, oh my gosh, I want to touch, I want to feel, I want to go to it. You have that aha moment. There are people that walk into the center and are overwhelmed. But we're there to help you, to guide you. But there are people that just walk right in and go. We're there for you, though. There's also the paper section. We have a photo of that. Is also sorted by color. But again, at this point, we've come a long way. It's 2021. We started in 2007. But just like in the plastic section, we take our time. And we focus more on organizing, curating, and inspiring. For example, we devote a shelf to look at all the things you can get from a box. For example, we'll have a box full of, another box, but actually a box made out of a box full of cut letters from different boxes. We'll have a container full of the flaps from a box that are actually, that have the side up. And that actually is the start of a three-dimensional, that's three-dimensional already. And a child, an adult can start making a three-dimensional structure if they would like. ISBN labels, we have a whole box of them, a whole container of those. The printing codes on boxes come in all different colors and designs. We have a whole box of those. Different colors from boxes are cut in all different shapes, and that takes time and that takes thought on our part. So everything is very carefully curated. Another example of what we show that can be, we show possibilities. The insides of business envelopes are beautiful. And there's a photo of those where you can turn those into booklets or writing tablets that can go into writing centers in schools. And again, people walk away, I never thought of that. Oh my gosh. So we're opening up new possibilities for people. Again, I'll never throw those away ever again. So because, you know, that went on for a while, and because we realized we're not reaching enough people, we had another dream. We want to make this on wheels. We need to reach more schools and more students. So we had a dream. We need to make it mobile. How are we going to do that? Well, luck came our way, and we were donated a snowmobile trailer. And Jane Rakusin when Jane Rakusin wants to get something done, she gets it done. And you see a photo of her on the empty snowmobile trailer. It was donated. And in the summer months of 2019, it was decorated and it was ready to go by the fall of 2019 to schools all over the tri-state area. And just like the materials center, the materials trailer is intentional. We set it up with intention to show materials and the possibilities. We want to inspire. We want people to come away and say, I can collect these. This is the pull tab from a milk carton. I have these in my home. And with all of this work, underlying all of our work is our second mission of sustainability, which ties back to our partnership with Donate NYC, which was established in 2016 by the New York City Department of Sanitation. Their aim is to reduce needless waste and increase diversion of reusable material from landfill. Not only does this work have the potential to raise awareness about the overproduction of materials, we have learned through our own research that it also reduces waste and increases reuse. In addition, the accessibility and zero cost of these materials naturally supports equity in every home and in every classroom. And this was particularly evident during the pandemic. Since we could not go into schools, we created a virtual program called Play, Create, Build Materials on the Go. Most of the classes Zoomed in children's homes with families present. Our audience broadened and our impact grew stronger. We learned about the child by the materials they shared with us, and they learned that all of us have the same materials. Some of us have the same ones, some are different, depending on the family's cultures and backgrounds. And this was a natural and non-threatening way to learn about similarities and differences. We helped them build and curate a collection of materials to play, create, and build with. And that's because we believe that children are capable, teachers are collaborative, learning is dynamic, environments should inspire, and play is essential.
Absolutely. I'm so moved by the whole initiative that you have and all of the mission and the vision. But it's really striking to me is this whole idea that you started this in a program to bring in loose parts into your program, because a lot of the centers that I've gone to, to that, like the Remita style centers that collect materials for teachers or teacher resource centers, they're big. And there's this sense of with big barrels and you come in, you buy the bags. But the fact that you started to support your program made it a community. And also the fact that you're there. I mean, when I came in and you were there to guide me, as much as I can think I'm the loose part lady, which I often question, I had somebody there with me. So either you're overwhelmed or you're not, you're there. So your mission and your vision is so strong that way.
Right. I often, yes, I sometimes when I want to clone myself because I don't know if I'm going to be sustainable. But yes, I feel very lucky for my job. I love it. Yes, I love interacting with the customers and the educators that I meet. And it's very important to try and get across our mission. But of course, there are people that visit that visit and don't want to talk about it. And we can't. The one thing I did learn is that we cannot control what people do with the materials once they leave.
Absolutely. But the way you curate it, which is leading
Which is suggestive.
It's sort of an opening for that. I mean,
exactly.
When I walked into your space, and it's not a huge space,
Oh.
but it's very well organized. And when I walked in there and I saw that beautiful, colorful wall, I was in awe. So I want to hear a little bit more about how do you go about curating these beautiful materials that are at the center, Material Center, Teaching Beyond the Square.
Yeah, people often ask us, how do we bring these materials into the classroom? Now they see them in the material center, they see them in our work. Now, how do I sort of recreate that experience in my own classroom? And I think those 5 sort of principles that Wendy mentioned before about children's capability and the role of the teacher and the environment, I think that those are really at the core of our work. And you can't just put out materials and expect this like incredible stuff to come out of it. There is a huge effort put in beforehand in the curation of them. And that's sort of what you're describing, Miriam. So I'm going to be sharing some photos just to sort of help people understand the logistics of how this work, of how we create these experiences in classrooms. We think a lot. We take a lot of time beforehand to think about which materials to bring, how they're going to work together and how children might work with them. So I just wanted to share a couple of ideas that sort of pop into our head while we're looking through materials to figure out what to bring to children. And what we always want to inspire them and encourage this sense of wonder. But how do you do that? I feel like a lot of people understand the philosophy, but it's really those logistics of, okay, I understand it. I understand why it's valuable, but how do I actually bring this back? So some of the things we think about are these 3 ideas: texture, color, and shape. This is an example of an experience I brought into some local preschools that I was working with. 3s and 4s were working with these materials, and it's a little bit hard to see in the picture to pick up on the texture, but I just want to let you know what you're seeing here. Those are velvet samples in the middle. We have paper on the bottom right, plastic in the top right. Those 2 brown rectangular stacks are wood samples, which have that wonderful grainy sort of texture, and then obviously the quartz. So we're thinking about bringing sensory experiences to young children, as we know that's how they explore their world, and that will pull them in. We also think about color. How does this look visually, and is it aesthetically pleasing? This particular set I put together using greens and neutral colors. And then we think about shapes. There's a lot of squares and rectangles and then some odd shapes. And even just providing some of those materials that are unique that way encourages language, encourages a discussion about, what is this? What am I looking at? And what does it feel like? A lot of children were taking those velvet pieces and rubbing them on their cheeks because they're so soft and so satisfying. So, trying to encourage that we're developing a relationship between the child and materials. Another thing we think a lot about is bringing familiar and unfamiliar objects. So a familiar object will pull a child in. Somebody who's maybe hesitant will say, hey, I have those orange juice caps from at my house. And that will sort of pull them in, right? But we also want to challenge them by bringing things they haven't seen before. Like, well, what are those white circles on the right? I've never seen those before. Or maybe the ones in the middle of this photo, those are the rings that you find underneath a juice cap or milk cap. It's that ring that gets left on the jar. Well, we take those off and look how beautiful they are. Like Wendy says, when you put them in a cup together, how beautiful they become. So we really do think about the diversity of those materials to really encourage more children to come over and to challenge them, what they're thinking about them. We think about access as well. So how many children are going to have access to these materials, and that will affect the amount of material that we put out. You'll see a variety of loose parts like this particular table, go-go squeeze caps and corks. These are some, and carpet squares and some of those velvet squares. But more importantly, notice the table we're sitting at. So we usually like to work with small groups as opposed to a whole class. It's a more intimate experience, and even choices as much as the table that you're using. You know, I try to work with a small group at a table that I'm not at the head of the table. I'm not the one teaching them how to use these. We are collaborating and we're working together. And even those simple choices about the space that you're working on and how many children have access to it are sending a message. They're sending a nonverbal message to that child about what's expected here, and what is my role and what is your role. So I think all of those little decisions are actually extremely important, and that all is part of the curation. We think about the working space we're on. Are we at a table? Are we on a carpet? Are we on the ground? You can see in this particular one, there's 4 sort of platforms or canvases set up around, which really signals to me that this is meant for 4 children. And it's on the floor. So that means, you know, you're going to maybe put something out different that you might put out on the floor versus putting out on the table. Also, I want you to notice that in the center, there are 5 small boxes with loose parts in them. And that's sort of when people often ask me, how much do I put out, right? We always like to err on simpler, the better. So less is more. And I like to start from a place of the number of kids I'm having. So if there are 4 children expected there, I'll put out 4 or 5 different types of materials. And that's sort of what you're seeing here. That seems to be about the right number of things to put out. But not just thinking about the number of them, how do they work together? What's the interrelatedness between these materials? This was a set that I put together for around the holidays. So these are little gift boxes. And you'll notice that all of the other things that I chose will fit in the gift boxes, because if I know anything about young children, it's that the first thing they're going to do is take the lid off and try to stuff them, right? So I want to make sure that that's not a frustrating experience. I want to make sure that that's something that they can be successful at. And so that this was just another sort of arrangement and curation of materials to bring to children. And just like how materials work together, we also think about how they connect. When we do this work, we don't allow them to use glue and tape. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One, we want these materials to have, as Wendy says, a good long life, that they can be used over and over again. They don't get glued to a piece of cardboard and then sent home and then soon after that into the garbage, right? We treat them just as precious as we might treat a bin of Magna-Tiles. And we also want to think about, if we're not allowing glue and tape, it kind of forces them to be a little bit more experimental. There's no commitment. There's a lot of trial and error. And there is a desire, though, to connect things. So in this particular example, you see some twist ties. You see a lot of objects with holes. We've got buttons. We have like spice caps and bottle caps that have holes in them. All of those can be connected that way, as well as the items in the center are can holders. So those obviously have holes in them. And then you even see in the top of this photo some we call these cross sections of boxes that I often see children stuffing into each other and sort of to connect them. So we think about connection of those materials, and we also think about connection between children. What is going to be a little bit challenging, where they have to ask someone next door, or, you know, it's next door meaning next to them, or where they have to sort of collaborate together because they don't have enough hands to make this work, or, oh my gosh, look how this child actually figured out how to do this. Let's learn from each other. So we're thinking about how our materials connecting, and we're thinking about how our children connecting. And one of our other pieces is really this response to our observations. So not only are we creating this really interesting setup and curating these materials, but then we're watching. And we take our observations and use those to inform our next steps. So this particular group I was working with, it was a threes class. And every time I came into the classroom, they turned it into a cooking experience. So down to the box I brought everything into became the oven, and they would put it under the table and they would count down how long until it was ready. So thinking about that, when I came back in my following times, I would try to expand on that concept. Okay, they're really interested in this. This is motivating for them. What can I add? What can I bring that's going to support that even more? So you'll see here I had some reusable ice cube trays. And I specifically chose materials that would fit in those ice cube trays that could support this sort of baking, cooking, interesting curriculum that was developing in that particular class. But the other thing is, because it's so open-ended, I didn't say that was how they had to use them. I knew they might, based on my suggestion here. Not my verbal suggestion, but my suggestion of materials. But I also knew it would support other children who were not interested in that. So that's one of the beautiful things about an open-ended experience, is it's really there to support any child wherever they are. Some other concepts that we sometimes use to guide our curation, and a lot of these are early childhood schema, so you might recognize some of these, but we think about comparing and contrasting. So that could be color, that could be texture. We think about construction or sculpture. I had one child who the teachers told me they could never get him to sit for very long. They were concerned about his attention. But when I would come in, he would sit with me for the full 30 minutes and not get up. Well, the entire time he was with me, he was building. So every time I came in there, I made sure I had something that would allow him to build with. And he always went for that. But there were a variety of materials. So if he wanted to go beyond that, great. And if there were other children who were not into that, that's fine too. But it's this wonderful sort of authentic way of supporting individualized instruction. A lot of children explore concepts like full and empty, open and closed, transporting, so moving objects from one place to another. We see that a lot in early childhood classrooms, where children will stuff something and then, move it around the classroom. Enclosing and enveloping, that was similar to the little gift boxes I brought, where children were stuffing things in those and sort of hiding them. Sound is often a topic that comes up a lot, especially I've worked with some twos classes that have done some incredible work with sound and different containers and different loose parts that go in them. There's often, especially I would say with fours, throwing, dropping, and rolling, sort of that trajectory schema, building ramps and figuring out how fast things roll, and all of those those movement. Connecting and disconnecting, which in the last slide where I was sharing that, there's a lot of that, and that is a wonderful way also, as we know, to work on fine motor. Rotating, spinning, and circulating. I saw this wonderful class, a fours class, where the teachers brought in Lazy Susans from their kitchens and put the loose parts on the Lazy Susan, and all the kids did the whole time was spin it and do it over and over again. And what an incredible way to explore such a sort of challenging concept, I should say. And then lastly, positioning and patterning. So it's a lot of arrangements and making patterns that they come up with. And this, in the background of this particular photo, this little boy was actually arranging all of the carpet squares in a certain pattern. And most of them were the same size, but there were a couple that weren't. And so he was trying to figure out how to fit those in. And, even he was actually talking as he worked, and it was just fascinating to hear him sort of work through that. But what a natural sort of challenge and something that he was able to work on, that it was a skill he was developing at that time. And something that's also really important that we make time for is fiddling around ourselves. So this is Wendy actually curating an experience with a variety of materials like cable ties and tubes and bottle cap inserts, and those very colorful things in the back are vinyl samples. And thinking about all of those concepts I just mentioned. So what kind of textures do we have, and color, and how are these going to connect, and how do they relate together? And then taking that one step further, thinking about how might a child use these? And you see her in that right picture playing with these materials and trying to predict what a child might do with them. And that also allows us to think, what's missing here? Like, this feels like it's missing something because my natural instinct is to do this and I can't. So how might I add to that? Or this feels like there's too much here actually. So I'm going to edit something. You know, it's giving ourselves time to fiddle around gives us the opportunity to really set up the children for success. And these are a couple of pictures of these materials actually in the classroom and doing very similarly to what Wendy thought might happen. Sometimes that does happen and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they do exactly how we imagined it would turn out, and other times they blow us away with an even better idea, which is magical in its own way. But you see this little boy, this is at PS1 in the Bronx. This is a 3-year-old and he's stringing those bottle cap inserts on the cable ties. And another photo of 2 little boys working together to do similar. They're actually stringing differently, but we just love how their toes are touching too. It's that building, not only are they connecting the materials, but they're connecting to each other. So what is the teacher's role then in all of this, right? We really see the teaching in the curation. It's everything that happens sort of beforehand. All of the planning and the thinking and the predicting and the playing of our own that's really where the teaching is, because when we actually put these in the classroom, that's our chance to step back. And if we put all the effort in beforehand, we really find the experience to be more successful, that we can step back. And when I say step back, I don't mean walk to the other side of the classroom. I mean, we are right there watching exactly what's happening, taking pictures, taking documentation and notes and watching what's happening. Because I always say, like, if you're going to put that much effort into an experience, don't miss the end, right? This is like the beautiful conclusion and you're missing it. So we're always there, but we also, it's not our job in that moment to show them how to use the materials. That's their job. They show us how to use the materials. We might have predicted how they might use them, and we use our knowledge of childhood development to inform those decisions, but it's really up to the children. And there really is no right or wrong way for them to use these materials. And so it's not our job to tell them how to do it. So in that moment, our role is to step back, to watch, to facilitate. So maybe encourage connection. Like I might say, I see you're having a hard time connecting those together. And I noticed the child next to you actually figured it out. Let's see, maybe they can tell us how they did that. You know, we might encourage that connection, but it's not our job to teach them how to use those materials in that moment. And the other thing I just want to mention is, I think a big piece of this is trusting the children, that we know these materials are going to meet them where they need to be met, that whatever it is they're working on, Loose Parts can support that development, whether it's social or physical or academic. You know, it doesn't really matter what it is that they're working on. Those things can be supported through these experiences. So we need to trust the children, that they're going to challenge themselves, that we don't need to teach them those things. You know, Loris Malaguzzi, I was just thinking about this earlier, he says that that you shouldn't teach a child something that they can teach themselves, right? So it's so much more powerful for them to discover these things on their own than for us to say, oh, look, let me show you how you can string this through here, right? It's so much more powerful for them to discover that on their own. I'm going to share a couple examples of, you know, some of those setups that I shared before, how they actually translate into the classroom. I mentioned we put so much effort into planning them, but now it, you know, it doesn't always turn out the way we planned. So this is the original one, the photo that I shared. And these are some of the things that children did with them. So you see balancing and stacking and arranging and platforms. Here's another example with the ice cube trays, just as a reminder of what that setup looked like. This one shows so much diversity. You see one child who's dumped everything into one container. You see on the bottom left, one child tried to fit as many of one item into one cube. And then separately on the right, somebody putting one item into each cube. So working on that one-to-one correspondence. And then that top right photo, that child didn't want the ice cubes at all. They wanted to build. And so these materials supported that as well. And the gift boxes with materials that fit inside them, some of the things that children did with them. On the left, you see some platform stacking. In the middle here, this was sort of what I predicted would happen. So stuffing them with things. But the interesting thing with this photo is they not only did everything match on the inside, but everything matched on the outside. So again, working on that one-to-one correspondence. And then in the top right here, we see a face made out of corks and tiles. And the one thing I just want to mention quickly on this slide, these are glass blue tiles. They had been donated by a local interior designer, and the teachers and the parents at this school were a little bit hesitant to use these because they're glass and they could break. And I'm a strong believer of trusting children and in a contained, safe environment. So with me at the table with 3 other children, it was safe enough for us to work with them. And when they did eventually fall and clattered to the table, nothing broke, but every child went, oh, fragile. And so from then on, they knew how to treat these materials. They're not going to know how to use precious things unless we teach them how to use them. So I just mentioned that because I think that was really powerful. And the kids felt so capable and trusted for me to give them such a precious item, right? It was really special. And lastly, I just wanted to mention, we think about where materials live. So, you know, this is a big way that we bring these materials into a classroom where we curate an experience and we put it out at a table and we don't use glue and tape. But there are other places that these can live in your classroom. Like in this example, these are bottle caps being used in the block area. Or what happens if you bring strung beads into the bowls in your dramatic play area instead of using plastic fruit? There's so many different areas of your classroom and in your home, I think, that you can use materials that they don't have to be in isolation. They can be in addition to the materials you already have. And that just loose parts are sort of like another layer on top of that. And they're just so open-ended that they can really be anything. And so that is one of the reasons that we just really love working with them.
Thank you. I think it's powerful to see what you all have been doing. I have a number of questions that come to mind. The first one is, how can somebody start this concept that you have, or even if we don't want to go as big as you did, start with a loose parts room where they can start a wonderful collection and build relationships in the community to be able to bring the loose parts for people to have more access to them. So what recommendations would you give them?
I would start with the community that they have. So if it's a school, I would start with the people in the school, the staff, and decide what are you going to collect and start a list, and then have the staff bring in what they have first, and have a sorting party and teach. I would assume that there's going to be 1 or 2 people that lead this, and so that they would have some knowledge of material center, and so that they would have done some research. But then everyone bring in what they have on the list, and then do a sorting party and decide how you're going to organize your material center. And then for maybe say a month, have everyone in the staff bring in those items and sort them, and then start to, which is what we did, is to then go to families. We did reach out to our families, and then once you do families, then into your community, which is what we did in that during the orientation. But it requires very detailed organization and being very specific about what you want to collect, because and also photographs with it, because what happens a lot of the time is that you end up getting people's trash. And so you need to be very specific that you want clean materials, that you want washed out, labels off of any glass, labels off of whatever you're collecting. You want to be very specific, because you need to educate the people that are going to be donating, and why are you collecting these materials, and show examples of what you are going to be doing with these materials, so that they understand, that's why you want the bottle caps. What are you going to be doing with these bottle caps? What are you going to be doing with the cardboard pieces? What are you going to be doing with the wood pieces? Find out what your parents in your community and your staff and your husbands, wives, partners of your staff, what do they do for their jobs? Find out, do they have resources that they could contribute? So that's, use the community that you already have. Find out what everyone does for a living, and sort of branch out that way. Find out, and then also decide what you want to collect.
And I might just add too that I don't think anything is too small. Like, I think you can start with a shelf or three,
Yes.
you know, a lot of people start with bottle caps. Like they just, okay, we're
Right.
just gonna start collecting bottle caps. So don't think that it has to be so huge.
Right.
And another thing I think that can be successful, and it depends on your community, your school community, but some people do have better success with like picking one item per month, because if
That's
we
right.
say, here's a long list of everything you can send, sometimes we have more success saying like, okay, it's fabric month, everybody send in your scrap fabric, and that
Mhm.
then you'll get like, okay, you know, it's a good reminder and then while they're doing that, they'll continue to send other things. So those are just two other suggestions.
And Jennifer, that's exactly right. And it's also more fun, and it's actually there's more incentive, because if you're just doing fabric, then you can sort it by color, and it's like, oh my gosh, look at all the fabric we got, and it's tangible. And it is like, look at all the bottle caps, and look at all, and then you learn also, because I've learned what colors, like yellow and purple. There's not many yellow and purple bottle caps. So you learn about the world and what doesn't get made very often. What colors don't exist as how do you say it? What colors don't exist as many as, how do you say it, Jennifer?
As often as others, they're not.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. But it's fascinating what you learn about the world and recycling and what things are made more of. And but do start small, and also be kind to yourself. Things take time.
They do.
I have to do one shout out to someone who has inspired me and taught me an amazing amount, and her name is Robin Koo. She was very involved in the Materials Center from the very beginning. She is still involved somewhat, but she was very important in the formation of the Materials Center and in helping me and teaching me so many things. So I just wanted to mention her, because she's brilliant in the organization and the ideas, and an artist in her own right.
I think it's always reaching out to those wonderful mentors.
Yes, absolutely.
Make those decisions.
Yeah, and collaboration is everything.
And I think that was my last question when we're talking, because I'm hearing a lot of equity and I'm hearing a lot of social justice around sustainability too. And I keep thinking about you bringing the materials into classrooms where you are also supporting the educators to see the power of using these materials. How do you get past the hurdles or past the challenges or past the fears? What would you say to people?
I finally acknowledge that every little bit helps. I mean, at first it was frustrating, but I do believe that little step by little step will make a difference. And I feel that somewhere, every place I go, every place we go, someone is affected. And I do believe that that's true. And some person sees something, and it every little step counts.
And related to that, I think it's also just, we always try to encourage people to just give it a go. Like there's no right or wrong. So just try and try to learn from others. And, you know, we try to guide people and help as much as we can. But I think also just trusting the children that we don't have to have a perfect plan for everything, that it's okay to, you know, just set some things out and just give it a go. And that it's a culture of support and not critique, and that, you know, we're just going to really support each other and be really reflective. We're incredibly reflective practitioners, and so we are always coming back to each other and saying like, what worked, what didn't, what could have gone, what could we do different next time. And I think that's a big piece of this as well. And connected to that is thinking about when we talk to teachers that, well, I've been doing it this way for so long, and, just to look at your own practice and think, am I doing it this way because it's the best developmental way to teach young children, or am I doing it this way because that's the way I've always done it? Like, reevaluating your own practices, I think, is a good way to also overcome some of those hurdles, because it's looking at your own beliefs and your own the way that you're teaching or speaking to children, and making sure that it still meets what you believe about children and what you believe they're capable of. Are those things matching up? Because sometimes they're not, sometimes they are. So I always say, like, I'm not saying this to say that what you're doing is wrong. I'm just saying, look back and make sure that your values are matching up to your actions. And I think working with Loose Parts and Found Materials gives us an opportunity to think differently and challenge ourselves. And what an amazing thing to be learning alongside the children.
I think that's the most powerful. I keep going back to a professor of mine who always said, don't tell me something works just because it worked. Tell me if you can do something differently. And that's the learning.
I also think that our work is so powerful, because I really believe in when I've gone into classrooms and been with children, and there are adults watching. It has always been, in my experience since I've been doing this, we have always been successful with children. Always. It's never failed. And so adults, maybe workshops have failed with adults for sure, in that I've had adults not like what I've done, but I have never, ever, ever had a child not like the materials that I've presented, or someone else from Teaching Beyond the Squares. In my presence, no child has never not liked what we have presented. And that's incredible.
And I wish we adults will begin to think more about that.
Yeah.
No
child has not shied away from what we have presented them. And to see a child instantly feel comfortable and relaxed and want to go to what we have put on the floor or on a table is just like incredible. And have a teacher say, they're so well behaved. I'm just like, no, they're engaged.
In the flow.
I mean, it's just incredible.
I have this theory that if we could bring educators to the creative selves, they may be able to do more of this. I think we do a lot of crafts because it's easier to follow instructions, and reconnecting to our creativity.
And also that feeling of watching that child, and I've seen this so many times, the child saying, what do I do? And you say, you can do whatever you want. And they go, really? I'm like, yes.
And the joy in that photo in front of the children. I mean, if we could recreate that photo in every early childhood environment and in every family where the adults are joyful,
right,
I think the changes would begin to happen.
Right.
Or the joy of, I have to close with just a little story with Wendy during the pandemic, sending out a flyer around her community, and you collected what?
Oh, I don't know how many Nespresso pods. I mean, just I have. In fact, they still email me. They say, "Can I drop some off? I have a whole load of them." Yeah.
I mean,
they're hard to clean.
There, I know. I have a whole bunch in my refrigerator, in my freezer too. But those are wonderful ways of finding loose parts. Thank you so much. This was incredible. I think people are going to get a lot of ideas, and I hope we see more loose part spaces. And
they're growing.
And they're growing, and areas where they can collect them. And you're such a model for that I really appreciate this. And I hope to see you in New York soon, and I'll come and explore again.
Please do. You're always welcome.
Yes, always.
Thank you. I will, because you really helped me that time, and I love the space. So have a great evening, and thank you for being part of the forum.
Thank you. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam. Bye-bye.
Bye.